Hello, everyone. I hope you hear me well and hope you see me well. Glad to see you all here. Yeah. And while we are waiting for the people to join, I would ask you please write in the chat where you're from. Have you ever been to Ukraine maybe, or maybe you are already in Ukraine? Just let me know something about you. Great. UK. Oh. Well, actually now I'm in Ukraine, not far from Kiev. It's like about 20 or 30 kilometers from Kiev. Yeah, it's quite sunny today in Ukraine. Good morning from London. Yeah, good morning from Ukraine. What is the weather in London, by the way? Because it's too sunny and pleasant here in Ukraine. Yeah, Germany, great. I actually also work a lot of people from Germany. Good morning. Wales, great. It was in central Ukraine. Yeah, unfortunately, people had to move. 95 years ago. Great. Wonderful. Again, London. Yeah, okay, great. Some of you even lived in Ukraine, in Kiev. Yeah, I actually also lived in Kiev for several years. Now I'm a bit outside of it, but still, yeah, it's probably the city that always have some special place in my heart. Good morning from Dublin. Good morning. Yeah, in Ukraine, it's actually almost 1 hour. Yeah, so we have some kind of difference in time. Well, okay, good. I'm really pleased to see that I have today such a diverse auditory, actually, people from all over the world, I would say from Europe, from London, um, from Dublin and so on. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your experience. Thank you for sharing where you're from, about your thoughts about Ukraine. I'm going to say a few words about myself, probably. So, well, the majority of my life is somehow connected with languages, actually. I have worked as translator, as localization manager, as language teacher, and sometimes even as interpreter from time to time. I actually enjoy monitoring some linguistic trends all over the world, and then usually bother my friends and my family with all the different kinds of facts about the life from the life of languages. Yeah, the topic of today's webinar is actually also within the scope of my interests, and already from the beginning of the invasion, I have understood that everything that is happening, that was happening actually, would have some track in the language for sure. And that's why I've been watching with interest how languages in Ukraine behave. And today I'm happy to share my observations with you. Actually, I plan to leave some time at the end for interaction with you. So if you want to ask something on the topic, probably so you are very welcome. I guess best of all to use this Q&A section for that, so not to for the questions not to be lost in the chat. Yeah, and one more thing actually that probably just probably there may be I may disappear for for several seconds, maybe for 30 seconds, because we can have some kind of a power outage. So if I do disappear, it's not for a long time. I guess just for 30 seconds, as I told. So just be sure that I'll be back. But hopefully nothing will happen like this. Okay, so let's start. I will share my screen. Good. So today we will talk about the two common languages spoken in Ukraine. This is Ukrainian and Russian, of course. Historically, in Ukraine, we speak two languages. I would even say three languages. The third one is actually a mixed language that combines elements from Ukrainian and Russian. Mixed languages that combine some elements from Russian and Ukrainian. That is something like Spanglish in the USA, I would say. This is quite expected. I mean, this combination is quite expected as the Russian-speaking Soviet Union occupied Ukraine for almost 70 years. And although the Ukrainian language became the official language of the country after announcing the independence, still the Russian language remained deeply integrated into the lives of people. Again, historically, it was so that the use of Ukrainian prevailed in the center and in the west of Ukraine, while Russian in the industrial centers of eastern and southern Ukraine. Well, so what has changed actually after the invasion? It's important to say here that many people started speaking Ukrainian instead of Russian already after 2014, when Russia occupied Crimea and part of Donbass. However, the full-scale invasion that we had this year actually intensified the process immensely, and people subconsciously felt the urge to isolate themselves from everything that is somehow associated or connected with the language of the aggressor. Yeah, as you can see here on the diagram that was created actually this year, already after invasion, people were asked about how their communication has changed, and we can conclude that in total, 41% of Indian Russian speakers in Ukraine have already switched to Ukrainian, partially or fully, like it depends. Many people switched to using the language not only like in the institutions or somewhere in the shop, but also when they are at home with the relatives. Okay, and important to say that this pro-Ukrainian trend is also and especially dominant on the eastern part of the country, where as Russia claims the Russian-speaking people that are waiting to be liberated by Russian troops. So these are the territories that some of the territories are occupied now, and people at these territories also immediately started speaking Ukrainian mostly. The Ukrainian language became the language of prestige and business, I would say. So as I said, I live near Kyiv, and if you walk somewhere in the center of the city, you hear like more and more the Ukrainian language on the streets. Okay, let's move further. Yeah, similar trends are evident in music, with many more artists singing in Ukrainian instead of Russian. Again, they started doing so in 2014, and even more doing so after 2022, after the Russian invasion. Now, like usual people who just listen to the music from different sites and from different platforms prefer Ukrainian music to the Russian music and change the playlist accordingly, actually. And I would say that it looks like listening to Russian music is now considered to be a bad tone of voice, especially if you're somewhere in the public place. Yeah, so it was music, and absolutely the same applies to films, actually. And it's quite interestingly that before the 2022, roughly half of Ukrainians used to watch films or listen to the music in Russian, like quite often, or almost always. But as you can see, during the war, this number has decreased quite radically. And personally, I know a lot of people who refuse to watch films in Russian, and they watch them in Ukrainian instead. And some of them even stopped showing the Russian cartoons to their kids, like, and again choosing some traditional Ukrainian cartoons to show people, to show children, and to like to integrate them into Ukrainian culture a bit more. Yeah, and languages on social media. According to the source, according to statistics, 2 years ago, only every 6 posts, if I'm not mistaken, was written in Ukrainian, which is approximately 16% of our content. Now, again, after invasion, this figure has increased to 37%, which is quite a dramatical increase, I would say. But as you can see on the diagram, this increase is not does not appear on all the platforms. And for example, YouTube and TikTok still on YouTube and on TikTok still dominate Russian language. We won't talk about Kontakte and Odnoklassniki because these are Russian platforms, so it's not that like no need to count how many people post in Ukrainian there. Okay. Yeah. So what else? What else has changed? Again, speaking about YouTube, a lot of YouTubers stopped streaming in Russian. These are mostly people who originally come from Ukraine. They may live now somewhere abroad, and they used to have, for example, Russian channels. I mean, they used to stream in Russian. After the invasion, as the act of showing they are from Ukraine. They refuse to in Russian, although they lose, of course, a lot of audience, which results in their income. But still, it's quite principle for people to stop doing this. Yeah, the same with writers who probably used to write only in Russian till February 2024. After that, they declared that they would write and publish in Ukrainian only. Most of the writers did that immediately in their social media, and like they said something like, "We are not proud of writing in Russian," so now we change the situation. The same with the TV. Almost all TV presenters switched to Ukrainian. Actually, with the TV, the trend was not that critical, I would say, as with the social networking sites, because we had even before the invasion, we had quite a lot of TV presenters who were already Ukrainian. Yeah, and one more phenomena is launching of free courses of Ukrainian language from some language schools and volunteer organizations. They mostly open on the western part of the Ukraine, where a lot of displaced people who have fled to the relative safety of western cities like Lviv, for example, from the Russian-speaking East. So Ukrainian teachers of Ukrainian language and volunteers are encouraging these people to practice and embrace the Ukrainian language as the language of their everyday life. Yeah, neologisms. That is a usual thing in the language, as language usually always depicts everything that happens in the society. And as any living language, Ukraine generated a lot of such words as well. And from the very start of the invasion, the Ukrainian language is being replenished with such words. And as you can see, some of them appeared from the names of famous politician figures that, according actually to their behavior during the war, I tried somehow to translate them and to show how they would sound in English. In Ukraine, it sounds something like Makronaty. It's, you can guess, it comes from the name of prime president. And Ukrainians decided to describe in such a way people who make a big show of being very concerned about something, but actually doing nothing about the situation. Yes, okay, let's go further. Yeah, one more political figure and one more neologism, named after Russian defense minister. In Ukrainian, it sounds like Shoiguvato, and as you can see, describes people who pretend that everything is fine at work, but in reality, the situation is quite complicated. Right. One more word, which is already somehow connected with the name of the city, of the village in this case. And it refers to someone who continues doing the same mistake, although seeing that it's not effective actually, but still continues to do the same thing, which actually fails in the end. In Ukrainian, it sounds like Chornobaivka, which comes from the name of the village Chornobaivka. You can see the roadside on the picture, taken in winter time actually. Yeah, one more word combination already. Actually, it is tractor troops. It's one of my favorite, maybe, as there is a story actually, or a legend, I would say, of Ukrainian farmers who used their tractors to tow Russian tanks from the battlefield. Yeah, and now this image is depicted on a postage stamp. One of the postage stamps, the second one, if I'm not mistaken, or the third one. The first one, the first postage stamp connected to the war was this one, with the slogan that is probably familiar to you. And which actually shows the last communication between our border guard to the Russian missile police. The image was used on the first postage stamp of the wartime, and it's being discussed now among the Ukrainian linguists, actually, because they consider it quite controversial and not very decent, I would say. So like, there are two parts of linguists who argue about the relevance of this phrase to be used. And the first part actually is worried about the threat of obscene words in the Ukrainian language, as such words are like claiming that such words are not particular to the language, actually. And maybe the introduction of the swear words into the usage, which already actually happened to this slogan, may in the future weaken the linguistic foundation and moral foundation of Ukrainians. So like one part of linguists is against using, because obscene words, and there are obscene words, and it's not peculiar to the norm of languages, but other acknowledge the right and even the need of speakers to use such strong words in some extreme situations, but advise to write these catchwords in Russian, but in Ukrainian transliteration to show that it's not peculiar nature to our language. Okay. Yeah, and one more fantastic phenomenon. Actually, it's not a new word. It's not a neologist already. It's the word that exists actually for a long time. As you can see from the picture, this is a type of Ukrainian home-baked bread, which is pronounced in Ukrainian as palynica. In the wartime, it has become a shibboleth, which actually helps to distinguish Ukrainians from Russians. The word itself, palynica, is quite difficult to pronounce for foreigners, particularly for Russians. This is due to the phonetic features of the Ukrainian language, as in Ukrainian, this sound here, it is usually soft at the end of the words, while in Russian, on the other hand, it's usually hard. So a Russian speaker would never say the same as someone from Ukraine would say it. Yes. Okay. Yeah, and not a positive part of the webinar actually are some kind of dysphonasms. And as a result of the invasion, they quickly arose actually, and they are colored with different sense of meaning, from ironic and mocking to even insulting, as you see here, for example, and abusive, I would say. So this is a word that consists of two parts, Russian and fascism, that appeared actually even a bit earlier, before the invasion, but still gained a new meaning after the invasion, after February 24th. Yeah, and here's even the Facebook post from the New York Times, who also decided to write about this new word. Yeah, one more unpleasant thing that the Ukrainians brought to the language. It's this reason for calling the people who came to our land actually by analogy with Tolkien's characters actually, but in Ukraine this is a number of Russians invading forces. Yeah. And yeah, I even made several. Want to talk a bit and make several slides for the support that was actually very pleasant for everyone from Ukraine. Maybe it's how the language was supported abroad. And here is the again the screen from a statistic review that shows the increase of the users that decided to learn Ukrainian just mostly immediately after the invasion. Yeah, so as you can see, the number of users learning the Ukrainian language went up about 500% globally. According to Duolingo, the majority of increase comes from users in the US, as you can see, but there is even a bigger jump from people from Poland. And the company suspects that this increase is caused by people in Poland who are welcoming and hosting refugees. I decided just to be aware, to have some knowledge of the language. Yeah, and one more thing is the verb Ukraine. That was used in Urban Dictionary. It appeared maybe in a month or so after invasion, as far as I remember. And Ukrainians actually immediately tried to translate it into Ukrainian, and it sounds something like "za Ukrainino." They also started to use it, but it was somehow quickly forgotten. But the fact somehow is pleasant. Well, okay. So as we spoke about the Ukrainian language that started to flourish after the invasion, which is quite obvious and logical, there was a sharp drop of Russian language during the invasion, for sure. And again, here is the diagram where people were asked, what language do you speak at home? And even compared to several years ago, like there is a rapid decrease in Russian speakers. Yeah, moving further. As I already told, during the war, Ukrainians are opposed to everything that everything Russian, to everything that connects them to the country, which opens quite a good potential for introduction of the Ukrainian language according to the needs of the people. And what happened at schools? Of course, schools switched to teaching only in Ukrainian. Actually, they did it, most of them did it again after 2014. But after the full-scale invasion, like the rest is catching up. Okay, again, speaking about schools, it's being discussed again about removal of words by Russian writers from the school curriculum. So looks like Pushkin and Leo Tolstoy may now disappear from the school curriculum. Yeah, and of course, that also, I mean, the invasion also affected the book businesses in Ukraine, and most of bookstores and publishing houses just refused cooperating with Russian companies and sell Russian books. Even in summer, as far as I remember, there was one bookstore that initiated the collection of Russian language books that they wanted to send for recycling, and the proceeds then should be given to the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine. And they promised to everyone who bought the book in Russian a discount of 10% or something for the purchase of books in that bookstore, of course. Yeah, and quite logical again and obvious is the naming of streets made after famous Russian personalities. The local authorities in Ukrainian cities usually make polls, and people vote actually for a famous figure, or it may be a writer or scientist or anyone else who they want to choose for naming this or that street. Yeah. Again, it's more connected with the changes in the Russian language. In Ukrainian language, it's the new spelling of the proper name Russia, and the name of the Russian president as well. Already in the first week of full-scale invasion, the practice of spelling the names of the Russian Federation and Belarus as well, actually, was first spontaneously introduced in the social media, and then picked up by reputable news agencies, other internet media, and even websites of the Ukrainian authorities. As you can see here, is the post from Facebook, from General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. And here we can see that the word Russian Federation, they wrote according to this new way of spelling. Like again, I have this picture. Above, showing that the words like Russia, currently in Moscow, and the name of the president is written low capitalized. One more phenomena connected to the country who invaded Ukraine is the preposition, and Ukrainians started using preposition on instead of the preposition in when we speak about countries. It's something like a response to Russians, as in the Russian language there is actually a norm that allows to say on Ukraine instead of in Ukraine, and it's something like using article def, for example, with the names of the countries and saying the Ukraine. This creates the impression that Ukraine is a region, a part of something whole, like in other countries. So yeah, in response, Ukrainians started saying on Russia, and I put here an example how it would sound, and sounds a lot actually when we refer to some events that happened in Russia. Yeah, one more negative aspect that somehow influenced the language, the languages, and as well the country of Ukraine. It's a so-called linguicide. One of the goals of the Russian invasion is the denazification of Ukraine, they call it, which means like they have an intention to deprive Ukrainians of their cultural and political independence, assimilate them, and to turn them into one more country that is subjugated by Russia. This is primarily reflected in the language politics, and here in Ukraine, it received the name lingual genocide. We have actually a state language commissioner who is responsible for the language protection in Ukraine, actually. But apart from promoting the Ukrainian language, they also, like, people who work in the office also have to register such cases of linguicide in the temporary occupied territories. So here are some facts actually that we faced in these territories. On these territories is shelling of Ukrainian TV towers, shutting down or seizing Ukrainian channels and radio stations. Instead, they are launching, of course, propaganda broadcasting. There were even cases of kidnapping and murder of journalists, destroying Ukrainian literature, of course. And when it comes to schools, it's the school institutions are being switched to the Russian language of study and Russian education programs. They also, like on the occupied territories, some of national monuments or like some historical buildings are being destroyed, and the road sites, for example, are being changed. And here on the next slide, you can see such an example in Mariupol, which is in the east of the country, where the occupiers changed the signs on the road, the road sites to the Russian ones. Yeah, and one more phenomenon that I would like to mention is the conflict between Ukrainian-speaking and Russian-speaking Ukrainians. That is, again, these are two groups. One of them are Ukrainian-speaking people or people who have already switched to Ukrainian. They actually accused the second group of Russian-speaking people of not being ready to change for good of the country, and even blame them for the invasion. Speaking Russian makes it actually easier for the enemy to wage the war. So they believe that the language issue that was the language issue that actually caused the Russian-Ukrainian war, because it was actually the language that Russia used as the main reason for aggression, explaining it by the need to protect Russian-speaking citizens. And some of people begin to compare the Ukrainizations to the others, like blaming Russian speakers that they do not enough to make the victory possible. This declaration is actually quite logical and quite reasonable, because practically all Ukrainians know and understand Russian, but Russians do not actually. And this lack of knowledge of the Ukrainian language by Russian military is an effective way to identify them and to distinguish between a friend and an enemy. On the other hand, like people who still continue speaking Russian and do not switch to Ukrainian, claim that it may not be that easy because people are quite different. Some can easily change their vocabulary, while others find such innovations difficult to adapt. And it's not that easy to break this emotional contact with the language. If a person, for example, was born in a Russian-speaking region, in a Russian-speaking family, and the person spoke Russian in childhood, like all the fairy tales were read to this person in Russian. Then all of the friends are Russian speaking, so it's not that easy to cut out the language at once from the life of this person. That's why these people actually try to explain that they need probably more time, or they need to feel this impulse actually to change the language, because it's not that easy to do it immediately. What is my opinion actually concerning this language matter is that I would say actually that I find it quite positive. I find the tendency of changing language quite positive, because Ukrainian is an official language of the country. And the more people speak the official language of the country, the better it is for the country, of course. But still, I understand the people who cannot do it immediately, who cannot do it on demand, probably. And it really comes sometimes to conflicts, because, for example, in some parts of Ukraine, you can meet the situation when a waiter in the restaurant can ask a guest to switch to Ukraine, and then refuse to serve this guest if he refuses to speak Ukrainian. But I'm actually against the hate, and especially I'm against the hate in the language, because it actually gives the opposite result, I guess, and provokes some kind of resistance to speak the language. So to my mind, this willingness should come somewhere from the heart, maybe. And one more thing is that we all in non-occupied parts of Ukraine can sleep peacefully only because Ukrainians who speak Ukrainian, Russian, or even mixed language are on the front line now. So they are doing their work without distinguishing who is speaking what language, actually. But anyway, I would say that to conclude everything, actually, I would say that despite such language conflicts, or maybe some other conflicts between people that may arise from time to time, anyway, people are quite united, and maybe the sense of humor is our main armor in this case, that helps us to resist, because even in the most difficult days of the defensive war, Ukrainians still respond with different jokes, memes, and puns to every situation, and that gives actually the hope that we will overcome this language conflict and all the other conflicts in our life. Well, that was all from my side, actually. I am very thankful that you came to listen to me today. Thank you for your interest in Ukraine and your interest in the language life of Ukraine. Let me have a look at the questions. Do all Ukrainian people speak Ukrainian? Asks Maria. Not all of them, of course. That it was so at the very beginning of invasion, and it is so right now. But the tendency is quite obvious. Like the number of people speaking Ukrainian is increasing maybe every day. I cannot give some kind of focused how it's going to be in future. I guess it's not really possible that all people from Ukraine started speaking Ukrainian, but still, as I told, the tendency is so. What percentage of Ukrainian people speak Russian? Well, according to statistics, it's something like it was like every third person, especially in the regions on the east and on the south of the country. The most Ukrainian-speaking regions are people from the Western Ukraine and mostly in the center. So even after invasion, it became actually better. Yeah, people started speaking more Ukrainian, but still speaking about those who still stick to Russian. It's again the regions that I told. So in the east and in the on the south of the country. Does no one in Ukraine even think that it's sad that the Russian language should be left entirely to the aggressor state? Now, isn't such an exploration of matter of standing to the same level as the aggressor? In some way, probably yes, and that is I partially told it when I was speaking about this conflict, and some people who watch this conflict actually and do not participate in it are of the same opinion actually, because they think that the main thing now is actually to stay united and to help each other and not to hate another person for the language he or she speaks. That's why like my answer is, yeah, I partially agree actually, and a lot of people would be of the same opinion, but again, not all people think so. Okay, now I have been hearing both Russian and Ukrainian since before the war, and I will continue to learn Russian despite the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. For me, language has nothing to do with the politics. I do appreciate your opinion actually, and that is probably my opinion that has always been and not quite changed after the invasion, because me as the person who is in love with languages, like I cannot let myself blame language for something. Like language is just the result of something, not the cause. Okay, I live in Canada and I teach English and French to Ukrainian refugees as a volunteer. I use both Ukrainian and Russian during my classes, as some of them are native Russian speakers. Yeah, it's quite, I quite understand you actually, because here in Ukraine, it's quite usual when one person speaks Russian and another responds in Ukrainian or vice versa, and people understand each other. Like it has always been considered as a normal situation, and no one actually blamed another for using the different language till the last times actually when this conflict started to arise. How reliable are the figures you have provided that seem to show that people are switching in large numbers from Russian to Ukrainian? I don't know. I've noticed that all the data comes from one and the same source. Actually, it is. We had only one huge research on the language question that was published in summer, and that is the rating group. This is a sociological group that made this investigation, and it's been published, like quite a detailed investigation. It's been published on the site of this rating group, and that is the only source, official source that we can find now actually. But me as a person who lives in the country, so I can say actually that it's quite true to life, because that's what I see around me, around my friends, and on the streets of the country. Okay, дякую. That is very great. Yeah, дякую is something like thank you in Ukraine. Do you speak Russian? Are Ukrainian interpreters still happy to translate into Russian? Very nice question. Thank you, Tina. Yes, as most of Ukrainian people, I'm bilingual as well. And I also have quite an interesting situation actually, because I'm mostly used to speaking Russian with my friends and my husband, for example. But I originally come from the Ukrainian speaking family, or I would even say from the family that spoke actually this mixed language. Now it's that way that I'm talking to my parents in Ukrainian and talking to my husband in Russian. But what I see for the future is, for example, that I would like to talk only in Ukrainian to my children. That's my personal choice. Дякую. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, these were actually all the questions, and we are running off time a bit. Here on the last slide, I put the QR code for my Facebook page, so you can actually find me on Facebook. And in case you want to talk and want to say anything about or ask anything about the Ukrainian language or Ukraine in general, you are very welcome to find me and write me there. Okay, so thank you so much again. I'm very pleased that you came today. You spent your time listening to such a topic, which is maybe not that general for all the people and quite peculiar. But anyway, it was a pleasure for me to share my observations with you. So thank you so much.